There is a particular kind of surprise that becomes possible only after you have had enough time to get some of the things you once wanted. The promotion that once seemed enormous eventually becomes the job you complain about on a Wednesday morning. The recognition you imagined would change something fundamental about you becomes strangely normal once it belongs to you. And sometimes, years later, another opportunity appears. Something your younger self might have considered irresistible. Only now, you look at it and think, I don't really want that. It can be surprisingly difficult to admit. We tend to treat ambition as though it were a virtue rather than a preference. Losing interest in coriander requires no explanation. Losing interest in advancement somehow does. But what if, after enough years, ambition simply has to survive contact with evidence? When we're young, much of what we believe about achievement is necessarily theoretical. We can see the title, the money, the recognition. What we cannot know is what any of it will feel like once it becomes ordinary. Psychologists who study affective forecasting have repeatedly found that we are not especially good at predicting how strongly, or for how long, future events will affect our happiness. We imagine the destination much more vividly than the life that comes after arriving there. By the time you've lived through several versions of wanting, getting, losing, and beginning again, you have something your younger self did not have: a history. You have seen which ambitions genuinely changed the shape of your life, and which simply changed the description of it. And eventually another question begins to matter. Do I actually want the thing? Or do I want what having the thing would allow me to believe about myself? Those questions can look very different from the other side of 50. Because achievement has always had a double life. There is the thing itself, the business, the position, the work. And then there is what succeeding at it appears to promise. Proof that you were capable. Confirmation that your choices were worthwhile. Perhaps the satisfaction of finally being able to say, "There, I did it." That is an enormous burden to place on a promotion. And one of the unexpected privileges of having lived for a while is discovering that the argument never really gets settled that way. You reach one platform and discover another above it. What once represented a rival becomes your new starting point. Humans adapt. The exceptional becomes familiar. The thing that once made your heart beat faster becomes part of the furniture. Eventually, that stops looking like disappointment and starts looking like information. Because once achievement is no longer required to prove anything, something interesting happens. Some ambitions disappear, others become stronger. The project you thought you should do suddenly looks exhausting. Yet another project, perhaps one with no status attached to it at all, becomes irresistible. So perhaps ambition hasn't disappeared. Perhaps what has disappeared is the need for an audience. You can still attempt something difficult. You can care enormously about doing it well. You may even work harder at it than you ever worked for a promotion. But now it is allowed to remain what it is. A thing you wanted to do, not evidence in the case for your own importance. For much of adulthood, there is an imaginary person somewhere ahead of us, more accomplished, more established, somehow more complete. We make sacrifices on their behalf. We assume that eventually we will catch up with them and finally feel that we have arrived. Then one day, you may realize you've stopped chasing them, not because there is nothing left to do, but because, after enough years of testing the theory, you no longer believe becoming that person will settle very much. And perhaps that is the strange relief of no longer being ambitious. You haven't stopped wanting things from life. You've simply stopped asking achievement to tell you what your life is worth. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time.